video, I want to talk to you about job interviews, right? Many people find job interviews quite difficult, and it's like, what's actually going on here, right? Is it just that many people are bad at job interviews in some cases? Of course, everyone needs to work on their job interview skills. But many people are finding it quite difficult, right? Particularly now when you might be dealing with a layoff, looking for your next job. And it feels like a bit of a humiliation ritual, right? It's like a mind game that's getting played. You can't quite figure it out. And it seems like there's quite a flawed recruiting process, right? So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to get two people's perspectives. We're going to have the perspective of someone called Truth Tiger, who you can see has about 12,000 followers, and this is one of his bigger videos, right? You have 76,000 views on this, right? When I checked it a few weeks ago, it had 50,000, so it really resonates with people. 76,000 people seem to agree with this, right? And he's actually worked in office jobs, corporate jobs. He talks about a lot of day-to-day life type of things. We're going to get his perspective, and we're also going to get the perspective of someone called Rich Gilbert, who actually worked in Google. He worked as a management consultant at Boston Consulting Group. So we're going to get an interesting perspective from two different people. So let's listen to, firstly, this guy's perspective on job interviews and why it feels like a bit of a humiliation ritual.
If someone's legit or not, I don't know. Like I actually had a reference get called, and he told me about it, and it was like a last minute thing to get this guy down, but he vouched for me, which was cool. But it's just a weird way of doing things, and a lot of times, especially these days, people don't have as many social connections or as much of a network as they used to, so it's kind of tough to do that, and you kind of don't know who's on your side and who's cool or not. And just for me, with some of the stuff I've had to go through in life adjustments and cutting people out and stuff like that, it kind of makes that tough with the stuff I've had to deal with. But like, yeah, I just remember like when I was like 18 or so looking for a job, I go to some job interview, they say, so tell me about yourself. I'm like, I'm so-and-so looking for a job here. I didn't know what to say to that question, because they ask you these weird open-ended questions, and it's a weird game that they're playing, and if you don't know the rules to the game, you're gonna lose. Another one is your weaknesses. What are your weaknesses? And the thing about these questions is they're looking for a fake, scripted, robotic answer. And the more you can be fake and scripted and fake positive, the more you can be fake, the better you will do. The more real and genuine you are in these kind of interview situations, the worse off it is. It's not what they're looking for. They're looking for a lot of fake confidence, fake smiles, and they're looking for all these fake answers to try to make yourself look as shiny and nice as you possibly can. And you'd think they'd want to like see if you're genuine or if you'll give an honest, real answer. No, not at all. They're not looking for that. They don't want that. And for some reason, every job is the same way. And it's like, if you own a company, you can do whatever interview process you want. You can interview your new employees however you want. You don't have to use this template. But because everyone's in the matrix, they all use this same stupid template where they ask you these weird questions and this whatever. Like if I was them, I would for one like be like I would say like, hey, here's the job. I want to see how well you can do it. Number one, I want to see how well they could do the job. I'd want to spend some time with them and like see how they are as a person, see if they're cool or not. And I want to see like if they're real, genuine, if they have good character, if they treat people well, whatever. You'd want to see that. And they're not looking for any of that. They don't care about that. And really, it's like a contest to see if you can be like, this is something that's like, it's made like for narcissists. It's made to be like, to put on a mask and to be very fake nice and fake positive and fake happy. And then like for your weaknesses, you just have some pre-scripted answer. Sometimes I work a little too hard, or like you just say some fake stuff like that. And, oh, wow, we said he sometimes works a little too hard. And it's just like, why? One, like asking someone what their weaknesses is, that's a very loaded question. You're trying to get something over on them. You're trying to like see if you could squeeze you're trying to see if they could squeeze the guts out of you with these interviews. They're trying to like make you uncomfortable, see if they can squeeze your guts out. And man.
So what is he kind of pointing out here, right? And why does this message resonate with 76,000 people who've watched the video in the last month? I think there's a couple key points, right? Firstly, in life, you end up cutting people out. Some of the people you are cutting out are co-workers that have been quite toxic, but there might have been people you worked with, right? And then you might be depending on them or people who like them or in their little circle at work. when you're moving to your next job looking for a job reference. So it's always, as best as you can, try to keep a few good contacts at the company where you're working so they can provide the reference if needed. One good thing, particularly in the UK, and I see other countries following this trend, is that no company wants to end up in a situation where they're being accused of giving a bad reference, because then technically an employee who's moving to a new company can sue their old company if they give a bad reference. So how it works in the UK, the reference process is, if you're moving to a new company and they're doing a background check, they want to see which companies you work for, you give them all the details, the dates you've been working there. But the good thing is that when they reach out to these companies like top banks, places I've worked like Goldman's, HSBC, Morgan Stanley, or wherever else, the way it typically works now, all these companies will give as a reference will be your job title, the dates you worked, and the reason you left. Or sometimes they don't even include that. They'll just say the job title and the dates you worked there, which is quite a neutral reference, right? So they're not going to say anything that could help you get the job or help you lose the job, the next job that you're applying for. So that's quite good, right? One other thing I'd say is work on your LinkedIn profile and optimize that. And part of that will be when you're working at a company, try to get references on LinkedIn, because you'll lose contacts as you move forward, right? You lose connections. So if you have a couple of people who maybe are vice presidents, directors, whatever that would be, you develop a good connection with them, you have a good project you do with them, before months or years go by and then you forget to get the reference, just say, oh, I'd really appreciate it if you'd help me with my LinkedIn. It's just a quick link you can send them. They can log in through their LinkedIn, give a quick reference for you, like a few sentences, and you'll have that on your LinkedIn profile forever. So if you fall out of contact with them, maybe they go rapidly up in their career and they have a really fancy job title on LinkedIn, or maybe they move on, they get retired, whatever that would be, at least for the rest of your career, you've got a high quality reference on your LinkedIn profile, which most recruiters will see, and it's very low effort. It's just something you got to ask, send them an email with a link to your profile, and they can just essentially add a reference. It's very quick, and many people do it on LinkedIn, right? So that's a good thing to do. Second thing is, when they have a question in a job interview about tell me about yourself, some people are thinking, oh, what should I say? Should I talk about my social life? Whatever that would be. All you need to do is quite simple. Just summarize your experience or what's on your CV in a few sentences, right? Where you've recently worked, your experience before that, your educational background is nothing to worry about, right? It's not like you've got to really present yourself in this ideal way, but it can be difficult because often when you're dealing with normies or NPCs in the workplace, they are quite focused on the social elements, which I'll get into like later videos about this, how to present yourself in a way. But it's something just to be aware of, that you don't have to worry about some of these questions that can feel a bit tedious, right? The way I'd see it, it's a bit like speed dating, right? You're going from one company to the other, trying to interview and see where it would be a good fit, being in a speed dating relationship type of situation. So don't get too attached. You can be quite detached, but still present yourself in a professional way. And then the thing is, when they're giving you job interview questions about what is your weakness, right? I think there's different ways you can deal with this. You can come up with a fake small issue. You don't have to be real about it. You know, like you said, sometimes I work too hard. You can have these little small things. Oh, I have this small development area I'm working on. It could be things where it's clear it's not an issue, but it's something you'll pretend to be self-conscious about. If you're very good at communication, then you could just say, yeah, in terms of weaknesses, I think my communication style could be better. I'm just something I'm continuing to work on improving. So rather than it being a massive glaring weakness and red flag that they shouldn't hire you for, just pretend it's something you're working on, right? If it's tech skills and you've got a good coding background, for example, you can code many different languages, you might say, yeah, I'm working on learning another language, so that's I want perhaps a weakness or something I'm working on. So present it as a development area rather than a real weakness. Just don't mention any real weaknesses, of course. And then step 4 is, just bear in mind, you are dealing with normies, you're dealing with NPCs. They're not going to be giving you the best kind of input and advice. They're not going to be extremely helpful in terms of those interviews. They're going to be a bit obsessed with what normies and NPCs are, which are kind of fitting in socially, having group consensus opinions. They're not really people who are strong individuals, who have strong personality and confident and assertive. They're quite anti that, right? Which we see in this society and the general culture. It's kind of like anyone like that is pushed to the fringes or called one thing or the other, far right, conspiracy theorist, you can't have critical thinking skills, things like that, right? Well, you can't be too confident and assertive because people are going to say that's aggressive. So it's all about kind of playing along with their kind of slow, lack of progress, sense of mediocrity. That's what you often have to deal with in a lot of these interviews, even if they're top companies. So just present yourself well and kind of like a nice, friendly, non-threatening person. That's kind of the most important thing. And then point number 5 is around testing and case studies, right? So you can prep for case studies. Many cases, okay, what are the type of scenarios I have to do in this job? What kind of research can I do around that? For example, if you're applying for a job and you're going to be reviewing a lot of financial marketing material, then okay, these are the type of red flags I'd look out for that. So if I have a case study, I can prep for that, and I know what typical things that will be included in a case study, right? What they'd expect me to identify. And if you do have a case study interview coming up, typically that wouldn't be at the start, it'd be later stages. You can ask as many questions as you want before that, right? So you can ask HR, if you have a HR contact who's scheduling the interviews, just saying, I really want to prepare and do well for this case study. Could you share any information possible? Of course, they're not going to tell you exactly all the details, but at least you get all of that. Then you can do as much prep as you want, and it shows you're enthusiastic about getting the job. So don't get too worried about case studies, right? You can think it through and prep before. Point number 6. Again, job interviews are very much a social test. They're not based on technical skills, right? So often that's not the case, right? That's only 20% of what they're looking for. They want to see if you're a good cultural fit, which is a nice way of saying, are you going to suck up to maybe the manager? Are you going to fit in with the corporate culture or the team culture? And another way would be, to put it as nice as I can, if you're more of a submissive type of personality who would fit in with a corporate culture, right? And there's what they find in the corporate world is lots of passive aggressive ways of saying things that they otherwise wouldn't get away with saying. So that's why the term, are you a good cultural fit, is something they're considering. They're not going to ask you straight up, but between their team, they want to reject a candidate. They say, oh, he has good technical skills, but I don't think he's a good cultural fit, which just means he's just not going to fit in with the social dynamics of the team. I remember a funny equities team that I was working with on a sales and trading floor, and you basically had 2 kind of middle-aged white guys who were running the team, and the rest of the team, another 8 employees for the most part, were white women in their early 20s. Now, do I think it's a coincidence that you have 2 middle-aged white men running the team and 8 white women who are, the rest of the team who are in their early 20s? I find that a bit suspicious. And then when they would hire new employees, more often than not, it'd be that demographic. Occasionally, it'd be a younger man or a white man or 1 or 2 odd, like maybe different races and things like that. But overwhelmingly, it would stay consistent as about 2 middle-aged white men, and then the rest would be white women who look the same in their early 20s. It just seemed a bit suspicious to me. Like, why is that always the case in your team, given we are in London and it's relatively diverse in the workplace? I'm not saying they have to force DEI or diversity. It just seemed like they had a particular pattern there. And then when they would reject candidates, they would just say, oh, they're not a good cultural fit for the team, which probably means they didn't fit the demographics they want for their team, right? So there's all sorts of different things you need to look out for there. And when he talks about being fake in this environment, of course, it's a job interview and there's an element of professionalism. And I agree, you have to be fake to a certain extent. But the way I see it is like, when you go to work in many of these corporate environments, much of it is about being fake. It's not about productivity. It's about it's a performance. You're portraying a character. That's why so many of the little things really matter. Wearing a tailored suit, being well-spoken, having nice shoes or whatever that would be. It shouldn't be based on that. It should be just based on productivity. And that's why remote work makes sense if we're talking about productivity. But in many cases, it's just about putting on a performance in these offices and keeping up with the busy work without being really productive itself. So now we're going to listen to the perspective of someone called Richard Gilbert. Like I said, he's worked at BCG and Google in the past, management consulting roles. So he's got a different perspective here.
You're going to absolute strangers, as a potential employee, and it almost can feel like you're begging for a job, right? Please, sir, give me a job. I will do such a great job at this company, right? And people can sense that. People can sense that. When you are on the other side, when you're interviewing somebody, you can sense that even though the words coming out of their mouth are correct or so, you can sense that they're not exactly right for this job, right? So, actually, the research on this backs this up, that most of the interview decisions are made within the first 8 minutes of an interview. It's not about the content of what the person is saying. It's about the overall feeling that you get from the person. And you can say that's unconscious bias, blah, 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 blah. Well, nobody knows what unconscious bias is because it's unconscious. It's a made-up term. There is no research showing that there's some unconscious bias or that, you're a terrible person. Overwhelmingly, people make that hiring decision within the first 8 minutes of a interview, and then the rest of it is all just confirmation. The rest of it is just getting confirmation on the person that's talking, okay? That is the key piece of information here. You got 8 minutes. And really, you got about a minute, 30 seconds to a minute to make that first impression, where you're like in the club or you're not in the club. And I'm not talking about race or gender, blah, blah. That's nonsense. This is about you either fit in the culture and the company or you don't. That is the decision that somebody's making unconsciously, their unconscious bias, in that first 8 minutes. And the rest.
Now here he's talking about fitting in, and that's why, like I say, the social game does kind of matter, all those little social dynamics. And it makes me think when he says that about why people who went to certain maybe top universities or colleges, they have a certain culture, they all behave a similar way. And they conduct themselves a similar way. Maybe they went to private schools, they went to like some prestigious universities. There's a certain type of social conduct or consensus on how people behave, and that's the little triggers they're looking for in these job interviews rather than actual technical skills. That's why people who might be highly skilled but they're in a different demographic, maybe they didn't go to some of these top universities but they know what they're doing, they're often overlooked and ignored for a lot of these job interviews, right? And it reminds me of when I was at London School of Economics, right, which is technically one of the top economic universities. I did an economics-based degree there, and I didn't necessarily fit in completely socially, and a lot of the people who went to that university came from very wealthy backgrounds, and they also went to private schools before they went to this university, LSE. So there was a particular social dynamic and like a kind of a class system that was informally there. You had the upper class students who parents gave them basically a salary to go to these universities and a massive budget, and then you had other people who might have came from more middle class or lower middle class backgrounds who studied hard to get into these roles, and they didn't really fit in. It was like two social groups, and that's what ends up happening in a corporate role too, is like there's like an in crowd and an out crowd. And typically the out crowd isn't the out crowd because they're low performers, it's because they don't socially fit in with everyone else. And that's why when you go to these jobs, you kind of have to mimic the behavior of people who would be in that kind of upper class demographic or the privileged demographic who might have went to these private schools and things like that. Even though they're not necessarily smart, they're in control of the filtering process of deciding whether you can progress, and it's not depending on your particular skill level, right, which is quite annoying. And that's something you have to deal with in these job interviews and how you conduct yourself and portray yourself. So let's continue to think this through. There's that meme recently that's been going viral, aura, A-U-R-A, as in your aura and your general vibe. People can pick up on it, they can sense it, and they can see if you're really interested in the job rather than you're just doing it for the money or you're desperate for your next job. I think a lot of these things are quite important, right? Because like I say, if they're not going to consider your actual skills, they're reading your vibe. And he's got a point when he's saying you're kind of going to strangers and begging for a job. It is a bit of that dynamic. And something he mentioned, I think briefly here, or we'll cover in a future clip, is around how it takes about 8 minutes for the manager to read your vibe in a job interview. In the same way it takes them 8 minutes to pick up on your vibe, you could pick up, if we're honest, in the first 5 minutes whether it's going to go well or not. Things can change as it goes on in the job interview, but you can really pick up on the vibe. And that's why I say you should see it like speed dating. You're not that attached to the company, they're not that attached to you, and you should have an abundance mentality. If you're not familiar with the term abundance mentality, typically, again, it's used in a dating context where, as a man, you shouldn't think, oh, I've only got one woman I can be with. You can say, okay, well, I've got multiple options. If this doesn't work out, there's other options out there. Same thing with countries to live in, job opportunities available to you. If something doesn't work out, there's an abundance mentality. There's not a desperation mentality that I only have one thing and this is the only way has to work out. I have to get this job interview has to work out. That desperation obviously is off-putting, and you don't want to be giving that type of vibe out, right? So that's what I'm saying. You've got to have a healthy level of detachment in these type of scenarios. And he mentions a key term that I found quite annoying in the corporate world, and it looks like he did too: unconscious bias. We had a lot of training for this particular term in the corporate world, and It's the typical corporate brainwashing nonsense. Now, unconscious bias, I'm sure there's someone in the comments who's gonna act like it's like this legit thing we have to consider. The way I would see it is that it essentially comes down to your general ability to read people in groups, right? If you recognize certain groups, demographics, gender, whatever it would be, conduct themselves a particular way, that would impact how you view them later, right? And I'm not saying necessarily stereotyping people, but it's just like a bias you would have, like, okay, people like that conduct themselves this way, and they mean this and they mean that. And the thing is, you can't put aside all your previous knowledge and analysis of particular groups when you move forward in life. You can't say, oh, I can't be biased against this person. Well, if you've always seen that demographic act a particular way, obviously it's going to impact your perception of them without judging them too much. That's the thing. You have to pay attention to your basic instincts, which the corporate world wants you to ignore with all their kind of brainwashing of political correctness. Like I remember around this time, like 2020 onwards, where there was never-ending kind of behavioral brainwashing, probably part of the globalist agenda. Typically, so many of these corporate trainings are run by these kind of liberal feminist types, middle-aged white woman, MAWW, if you're familiar with that term, and they're almost like trying to train everyone's behavior to act like them or have these super politically correct opinions, and this never-ending behavioral training. And the thing is, if you want to live life and succeed, you're going to have good instincts and rely on your instincts to read people and not fall for a lot of the nonsense. So if you're learning about unconscious bias at your corporate job, or trying not to use your instincts to judge people in situations, you're really making a fool out of yourself, and people are going to take advantage of that. So really try to read the vibe the same way they're trying to read the vibe of you. If you're in a company, you get a bad vibe, it feels negative and depressing, or the manager seems like he could be a potential bully, trust your instincts on that. And this is the thing when he's talking about being in the club, fitting in the company culture or not. It works both ways. So you should think whether you're going to fit in or not, right? And it's not that hard to read when you really try to pay attention to your basic instincts there, right? I think it really comes down to this behavioral check that they're doing in these job interviews. It's not a technical check, acting fake nice in a very rigid way, being something that they prefer in the corporate environment, which is unfortunate because the way these companies were built and sustained and the real money makers aren't this, but this is what they're often looking for. They're almost looking for this kind of easily controllable, effeminate, pushover man who's kind of submissive, controllable. That's what they want in these type of corporate roles. And that's why you see a lot of these men in these kind of middle management or lower senior management type of roles, because that's what they're vetting for. They're not looking for the strongest, most assertive man. They find that as a threat to the company, right? And that's why you've got to understand how to play along with their nonsense and kind of, like I say, be inoffensive in a lot of these interviews and overly nice. So you've got to decide whether you want to do that over the long term or not. In job interviews, of course, you're looking for that job, but over the long term, I say you might pursue self-employment or living life in your own terms. So let's go back to listen to more about what Truth Tiger has to say about the difficulty of some of these interviews.
And the thing is, like, someone who's like a bad employee, you're not going to catch them using that. It's like that's not going to really work that well for someone who's, as a matter of fact, for someone who's like a liar. I said this earlier. Someone who's a liar and a manipulator and stuff, like that kind of system is going to favor those kind of people because they could just like act all fake nice and act all fake this and act all fake that and do well in the interview. And I don't know, it's just so much bureaucracy. It's so much like paperwork, and just all the bureaucracy and paperwork of it makes me nervous and uncomfortable because you never know, and sometimes they're going to make you pay for the freaking background checks. You got to like pay $30 just to apply for this freaking job, and it's just like, man, like this is just stupid. And like it's such an uncomfortable, humiliating like process, and they're just trying to like put you on the spot and see if they can catch you and stuff. And I mean, I've had a lot of bad coworkers that have gotten through these interview processes easy, so I don't really know what the whole merit of all this stuff is. Just like test them out, give them something that's very similar to the job, see if they can do it, talk to them, see if they're all right, whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they...
So that's just a short clip there. We're going to come back to him in a moment. But So, this is what he's saying. He's making a good point. The job interview process is flawed. It's not filtering for the best employees. Many people can lie and manipulate well in these interviews, because that's what the kind of corporate world is based on. Is like giving preferential treatment to liars and manipulators rather than competent, productive, good people, right? Good, honest, hardworking people always end up getting the short end of the stick and held down, right? Now, I interviewed at many top corporate roles and interviewed people. And if you're interested in kind of corporate coaching to understand this, I've worked at Goldman, Morgan Stanley, other companies I mentioned earlier, and I have a career coaching program to help navigate you through this very difficult dynamic. There's a link in the description if you want to speak with me. But going back to this, so being on both sides of that interview process, interviewing for roles, interviewing people for some of these top corporate roles, I notice, like I say, that the people who tend to be fake or dress well, parrot the right opinions, the right talking points, even if they don't understand the basics of the role, they typically do well. There's so many different examples of this, of how dressing well can do well for you. I remember particularly, there were so many funny instances of this, but I was at director level working with someone who's at vice president level, and we were interviewing a new junior candidate for a role. And this one woman, her whole interview, we were asking her questions about why she's interested working here and things like that. All she could talk about, and I kid you not, for half an hour to almost every question, was how she supports diversity. Like, I really think it's good to work at this company because you're really pro-diversity, and I believe I can contribute to the diversity of it. And I asked her a few little questions, and there wasn't really any substance coming out of this, right? And after a while, I started to think, like, what's going on? So we did the interview. And then we go back to HR to provide our feedback, whether they should be invited for a second interview. And I basically gave that feedback in a nice way. She seemed quite focused on diversity rather than having any technical skills or having done any company research or any technical skills whatsoever. And the other guy who was interviewing this candidate with me, the vice president, he completely disagreed with me. He's like, no, she has the right values. We need these type of corporate values, but she had no skills whatsoever that was relevant. And I understand she was relatively junior. She might not have had all the experience, but I remember interviewing at that level, at the analyst level. I would do a ton of research on the company, know all the talking points and the buzzwords about what's going on in the company, like new projects or new financial projects, whatever that would be. And I would have some technical basic understanding of what we'd be doing. But these other people don't, and they're not looking for that, right? And this is why this guy I was working with, I won't name the company where we were doing this interviewing process, but he used to work at BlackRock and other major asset management firms, so State Street or things like that. So this guy was not like a junior guy. He knew what he was doing. And it was like, this is what the agenda is in the corporate environment. It's like filtering for opinions and do you fit in with our current corporate agenda rather than actually being able to do the job. And that's why it feels kind of humiliating, right? Which is one of the other points to bring up here is you have to go there a bit like a beggar to deal with people who are kind of mediocre and give them preferential treatment. That's why it's so important to save and invest. And I know why saving and investing can seem boring or something you don't want to keep sacrificing your life for the future. But over time, for me and most men, you realize that being a minimalist, not being dependent on the system, being chill and living life in your own terms is more fulfilling as a man than, in some cases, climbing some of the corporate ladder beyond a certain point if you keep coming up against this brick wall in job interviews and job roles, right? And the thing is like people are in this very tricky situation, right, where you want to appear eager but not too desperate for the role, and that's kind of a tricky game where you've got to maintain your patience and composure in some of these difficult environments. So that's an interesting thing to consider there. So let's continue to listen to the other contact here and his perspective on code switching, which is what we've been talking about just now.
We're very good at being kind of personality chameleons, right? Where they can shape to whatever situation they're in. Okay, you can do that. You can kind of, read the room or whatever, fit in. And to some extent, we all have to do this, right? We all wear different masks, right? You talk to a police officer, you wear thank you, sir, yes, please, kind of mask. If you talk to your wife, it's a very different mask. If you talk to your kids, it's a very different way of interacting. And the same thing when you're in an interview, right? It's a bit more formal, discussion and so on. But the very first job that you have is to make rapport with the interviewer. That's the very first job you have. Become friends. Get right there where you guys are talking immediately on substance issues, things that interviewer cares about, and then you're off to the races. So whatever that is, there's two ways of thinking about this. One is, oh, I got to really like work and research and figure out the company and then act that way. You can. That's one. People go through their whole career doing that sort of thing. The other sort of end of the spectrum is being yourself and finding a company that really fits with you, right? And a manager that fits with you and a team that fits with you. Right? Not all companies do. And once you find this kind of, team and group and company and so on, you know what I'm talking about. It's a really nice feeling. You're like, oh, I can be myself. Like I'm respected here and I can converse with everybody just totally fine. And so that's kind of the trade-off, right? If you get into a company and through the interviews get into something that you're sort of pretending to on the interviews to get into the group, you're going to have to keep pretending. On the other hand, if you find it's harder to find that group that really fits you in the interviews and so on, but then chances are you've interviewed them, so to speak, and you can go on into the company being a bit more of yourself. Right? We always have to wear these masks. We always have to, change our tone, change our language and so on and behavior based on the circumstances. But the second big thing that I want to mention on this, right? The first one is that 8 minutes. Focus on that 8 minutes. The second thing is it's not so bad to find a team that suits you, right? We can get so nervous about interviews, like, oh, well, they like me, da, da, da. But then you get into an interview and it's just smooth as butter. And you're like, oh, I fit here. That's what you're looking for.
I think it's easier said than done. I fit in here where lots of people don't feel they fit in, and they go from one job to another and they never fit in. They always feel like they not only have to put on a bit of a mask of professionalism and politeness, which we all have to do, but they feel like they have to be very fake. And this is why job interviews and like many of the corporate issues I'm mentioning actually do occur, and people feel like it is a humiliation ritual. And then if we just expand upon that point, he's focused on an important thing about being a chameleon and code switching, which is kind of interesting. The way code switching works, if you're not aware, it's the same way when you're at work. A manager might say, can you provide a detailed report by end of this day? We need a clear analysis of the data. You'd say, of course, I'll compile key insights and send a structured summary by 5 p.m. And that's kind of the more formal professional tone you take. Whereas outside of work, you might just, word it completely differently in a more blunt or kind of casual way. So this is kind of an important thing to consider, right? When you're dealing with these environments, of course you want to be professional, but to what extent could you code switch and maintain that mask or that code switch over the long term for 8 hours, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week or more for months and years on end, right? And that's when people tend to get wore down by playing that mask, and the mask slips and they might come across as unprofessional, but it's not that. They just feel like it's exhausting not being able to be themselves, and that's why the job interview process can be a bit taxing on people when they have to put on a particularly fake persona. And I think what he's saying here is kind of important about reading the room. Like, what type of personality are they looking for? And then you give them that version of yourself, whether it's, like I say, not being too dominant, but being still confident, building a rapport. I think that's important too. And just appear to be like a friendly, approachable person. Because if people are going to be working with you and they're interviewing you, they want to be someone they can be around, that they feel comfortable being around. So just making people feel comfortable, making the interviewer feel comfortable. You're just like a chill guy or someone they would actually get along with is very important, because again, they can go and pick someone who's super technically skilled for the role, but if they don't like them or they're just annoying to deal with, they might not want to hire them for the job. So it's just about being like a friendly, nice person that they'll actually want to be around. And I think, when it comes to building a rapport, they want to see your personality, particularly for these long work hours. Like I say, if you have something in common, something work related, can you pick up on like a slight joke or hot topic in the industry, for example, whether it's a new coding language that they might be working on, or a new kind of financial project that all the banks are focused on. If you're doing interviews at investment banks, you might know, oh, how's it going with the MiFID 2 project, for example, or whatever that would be. And I think it's very interesting where you can have the technical skills, but after several years of experience, If you're maybe after working 3 or 5 years, many people have similar levels of experience. They can generally do anything that they're tasked with as long as they've been given a bit of context. So that's why it makes sense for them to be less focused on your technical skills as things go on, because there's a certain base level of technical skills you'd pick up after a few years in the industry anyway. It's very difficult to identify differences between one job interview candidate and another beyond the actual personality and whether they like you or not. And that's why it becomes so much about that as you move on in your career. The truth is that most people, especially if you watch my channel and you relate to my content, in a sense, you'll never fully fit in this dynamic, right? It's just a job where you can fake it enough to kind of succeed as best you can, right? And if you can find a job where you don't have to fake it that much, which you was just suggesting, it's easier said than done, but it is good to look for that and maybe stick with that. Many people think, oh, I'm in a job and maybe I'm not progressing. But if you really fit in the environment, you're going to have to realize that if you go somewhere else, you might not fit in. It might be a lot worse. The grass isn't always greener on the other side, right? As that the saying goes. So I think it's important to kind of realize what your personality types, what the long-term trajectory of you would be, right? If you prefer small companies, maybe focus on that and try to climb the corporate ladder there. If you're better in big companies and you can deal with those type of personalities, then again, focus on that. Really try to figure out what is your lane and build a lane, carve out a lane for yourself and where that will work over the long term. And if you're, like I say, really struggling with that, then self-employment and things like that might be a better fit for you, even though there might be a bit of financial instability. It's really about figuring out and carving out your lane. Everyone's an individual. And that's why I work on it with my coaching. There's no group solution here, right? It really does depend on individual personalities and how people are actually finding that, rather than just say, oh, well, you just all need to behave a particular way. Some people realize that, 5-10 years into their career is okay, but they're not really going to make it. So what should they do differently? Do they need to invest more? Do they need to develop a different skill set, pivot their career, move from finance to tech to finance, whatever that would be, right? So that's an important thing to kind of figure out. And before you hit a breaking point, some people have, the midlife crisis, kind of mental breakdown, mental health issues, a big thing right now in society. It's because a lot of people feel like they're not fitting in, and a job interview or continually issues in many companies around the culture and the communication style really is a hot topic for people, and a red flag of how they're going to manage the rest of their life in this dysfunctional society. So let's listen to the final clip on his perspective. Quite important here.
HR recruiter people, and they throw you in some database, and I literally got a call from a guy when I was looking for jobs back in the day, and he thought I was one of my references. So I got this guy to be put down as a reference, and this guy had like 10 years experience at Microsoft or whatever or something. This recruiter guy is super excited. Like, we got a great job for you. We're awesome. You're so-and-so, right? I'm like, no, what? But they just throw you in their disorganized, freaking tangled up web of a system. And it's just like, who knows what's going to be spat out at the other end and on the other side. It's just, dude. And the thing is, if you're not like well connected, if you don't have a lot of friends and stuff like me, that kind of really puts you behind, because now you don't know the people who know the people, and that's something they're very into. But for most jobs, the people you know is not going to really make that big of a difference. If you're working sales or I don't know, whatever, some stuff like that, it might make a little bit of a difference. Or I don't know, event management, or there's some fields where, yeah, I could help, but for most jobs, it literally does not make a difference at all. But they want you to know these right people and be connected to these right. It's dumb. I'm over it. And it's just a humiliating process to have to go through. It really is. And I literally had this like recruiter guy who literally spoke to me like a robot. Every time he'd answer the phone, he'd be, hello, this is so-and-so, whatever, just like robotically. And then he says to me, like, make sure to show some personality, whatever. And I'm like, dude, I'm showing personality. You're freaking talking like this robot. And the whole process and the whole thing, it's just very weird. It's very strange. It's very arbitrary. It's very like, I don't know. It seems like they're kind of like throwing just like, kind of guessing. Or someone just decides that they like the cut of your jib. And that's what'll really get you the job. If you're, the right person you're talking to just kind of decides they like you. And it's just, the whole thing just makes like no sense. It is very weird. It is very strange. It's very time consuming. And we're not taught about this. Our parents.
So he's got a good point there. When you're dealing with HR, often they don't know the technical elements of the role, and what they're effectively doing is they're looking for different ways of identifying their best candidates based on a couple buzzwords they've been given by the hiring manager, right? So that HR will just be like, oh, okay, so we're looking for someone who has these particular technical skills, this bit of 5 to 7 years of experience, for example, but they don't actually know what they're doing. So you'll see a lot of incompetent HR people who don't know anything. It's funny in this story, he said he got a phone call from HR who were doing background checks and they confused him with the actual reference contact he listed. So it's completely ridiculous, right? And HR, there's a reason why people make jokes about them. They may act super smart or have the presentation of that and representing the company, but they don't understand the requirements of the roles, and they understand the professionalism that they need to portray, but not a lot of actual substance there. So that's what I mean. When you're going for these jobs, what they're looking for is a certain look, right? Not a specific super skilled professional, right? They just want you to look the part. It's more about style over substance, superficiality over skills, and playing along and being the appearance of competency rather than actually being competent, right? Which is kind of clown world, if you're familiar with the term clown world. You can look at the weak, the dumb politicians that rule over you and say, well, how did they make it to that position? Nothing to do with skill, it's to do with playing the game, as they say, right? Another point is around networking, right? Networking, you have to consider what type of people you're networking with. Are they going to help you find different opportunities and lead to job interviews? So that's why sometimes, even if you don't like some of your co-workers, senior or middle management, that networking with them can really help you push forward and be one of their favorites for other opportunities that may come along in the company or other companies they might move to, right? So it's just something you have to get used to, right? That's something I realized. There's many people in those similar roles as you, similar level or more senior, and they don't have some basic technical skills, right? And there's a reason for that, because technical skills really aren't highly valued. It's more of a social game, right? And you can see him coming to this conclusion, which was covered in the other person I was referencing there in the other video here, Rich, right? It's like he's coming to the same conclusion through his job interviews, that is more of a social factor. And there's a key word here I want to mention here, the likability factor. How likable are you, right? It's massive. And I think it played a role in job opportunities I've got, even though I kind of didn't necessarily socially fit in all the time. It was kind of, is he a likable person? He has technical skills, but is he likable? That's kind of important, right? I tried to show skills, technical ability in interviews, and that didn't really connect with them. I could tell that wasn't resonating with them, and that's what I mean about following your instincts and picking up on how people are interpreting you. The similar, if you go to a speed dating process, being in any social networking group, what's the real social dynamic here? Is it really connecting with people? That's what I mean, like being nice and inoffensive, nice, friendly, fake intelligence. These are saying all the buzzwords they're looking for is more important than actually having substance as a person in the corporate environment, right? Playing along with their small talk and nonsense, it's a lot more important than actual technical skills. So we're going to go through a couple comments here and see what are actual other people saying. We have the top comment that says they're trying to make sure you're as fake as they are, so you'll fit in with all the other phonies in the corporate environment. We have Lewis here who's saying interviews are straight up acting auditions, and it's got a like by the YouTuber here, right? So you can see here, right, other people are picking up on the fake nice or the fake personality you've got to put on in corporate environments. When it comes to job interviews, Wrong Think OZ says it's definitely likely a humiliation ritual, particularly like put down 3 references. It just makes you feel very small, like you're in school or something, looking for approval and validation desperately. Then we've got someone who's got a funny name, Don't Be a Dog's Body 3564 says, because working for someone else is also like a humiliation ritual. They don't want anyone who has an independent personality type. And lastly, we have Mushroom Magic, who says, I think people in HR are bored out of their mind and want to feel important too. I hate job interviews. Everything's so confusing. Their questions, expectations are so out of touch and plain right stupid. Don't ask me trap questions or indirect questions. Ask me everything plain and simple. And why the hell are there 3 to 4 interview rounds? And I don't like the playful questions. What are your hobbies and passions? What do you do in your free time? Tell me the time you had to work hard or some crap. I'm here to get my job done, not to be in a support friend group. If I want to connect with people about hobbies and passions, I will get into a local community or something like that. And that's the reality, right? Like I say, the personality game, the social game is so big in these corporate environments. I realized it working at many top companies. I offer a career coaching program, link in description. I'll help you map your career path to freedom, help you with interview practice, outsmarting office politics, and being a man in the workplace environment when they don't want you to be a masculine man, and preparing for promotions, dealing with layoffs, and developing a financial independence strategy so you can progress in your life without these negative dynamics surrounding you and determining whether you can progress and make a lot of money or not. So it's key survival strategy. Link in the description to speak with me directly. Let me know in the comments how you feel about job interviews. 2 recommended videos on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.